The winter wind howled like a dying animal across the Dakota plains, and Violet Winters knew she was going to die out here in the snow with her unborn child still inside her. She had been walking for what felt like hours after Marcus abandoned her on the road, leaving her with nothing but the thin shawl around her shoulders and the bitter knowledge that the man she thought loved her had thrown her away like garbage when he discovered she carried his baby. The blizzard had come on suddenly, as they often did in South Dakota during January of 1884, and now she could barely see 5 feet in front of her face through the white curtain of snow. Her feet were numb inside her worn boots, her hands frozen where they clutched the shawl tight around her swollen belly, and every step felt like walking through quicksand. She stumbled and fell to her knees in a snowdrift, gasping as the cold bit through her dress. The baby kicked inside her, a reminder that 2 lives would end out here on this God-forsaken road between Sioux Falls and nowhere. Violet tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate anymore. The cold was seeping into her bones, making her thoughts slow and fuzzy. She thought about her mother back in Pennsylvania, about how she had warned Violet that Marcus was no good, that his promises were empty as a dry well. Mama had been right about everything. Through the howling wind, Violet heard something that might have been thunder but sounded rhythmic, getting closer. She looked up through snow-crusted eyelashes and saw a dark shape materializing through the white storm. A horse, she realized, with a man on its back. The rider was hunched against the wind, his hat pulled low, but he sat the saddle like he had been born there. The horse, a big bay gelding, stopped right in front of her, and the man swung down in one fluid motion. "Jesus Christ," the man said, his voice rough but somehow warm despite the cold. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same unforgiving stone as the Black Hills. Dark stubble covered his jaw, and his eyes were the color of a summer sky, incongruous against the white landscape surrounding them. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" Violet tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. The man did not wait for an answer. He shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, and the warmth that clung to the fabric from his body heat felt like a miracle against her frozen skin. "Can you stand?" he asked, already sliding his arms under her knees and behind her back. When she did not answer, he lifted her like she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his chest. Through the thick wool of his shirt, she could feel the steady beat of his heart, and that sound became her anchor in the storm. "You will never be cold again," he said, his voice firm with a promise that felt like an oath. "I swear it on my life." He settled her onto his horse, then swung up behind her, keeping one arm locked around her waist to hold her secure against him. His body blocked the wind, and Violet found herself leaning into his warmth without even thinking about it. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and she felt the man tense behind her. "How far along are you?" he asked, turning the horse and urging it forward into the storm with confidence that suggested he knew these roads even blind. 7 months, Violet managed to say through her chattering teeth. "Maybe 8. I am not certain." The man made a sound low in his throat that might have been anger or concern or both. "There is a line shack about a mile from here. We will hole up there until this blows over, then I will take you into town. I am York Lancaster, by the way, ranch hand for the Double R spread." "Violet," she said, because it seemed important to give him her name since he was saving her life. "Violet Winters." "Well, Miss Winters, you picked a hell of a day for a walk." There was no judgment in his voice, just a kind of wry observation that made her want to laugh even though nothing about this situation was funny. The ride to the line shack took forever, and no time at all. Violet drifted in and out of awareness, the cold and exhaustion pulling at her consciousness. She was vaguely aware of York speaking to her, his voice a steady rumble against her back, asking her questions to keep her awake. Where was she from? How did she end up out here? She answered in fragments, too tired to lie, telling him about Pennsylvania and Marcus and the baby and being left in the snow. He left you. York's voice went hard as iron. A pregnant woman in a blizzard. He did not want the baby, Violet said, the words barely more than a whisper. Said I was trying to trap him. Told me to get out of the wagon and find my own way. York did not respond to that, but the arm around her waist tightened, and she felt safe for the first time in months. The lined shack appeared out of the snow like a miracle. A small, rough structure barely bigger than a shed, but it had 4 walls and a roof, and that was all that mattered. York dismounted and lifted Violet down, then led his horse to the lean-to attached to the side of the shack. He worked quickly, getting the horse settled with practiced efficiency, then picked Violet up again and carried her inside the shack. It was not much warmer inside than out, but at least they were out of the wind. York set Violet down on the single narrow bunk against one wall, then moved to the small potbelly stove in the corner. Within minutes, he had a fire going, feeding it with wood from the stack beside the stove. The warmth spread slowly through the tiny space, and Violet felt her body begin to thaw in painful increments. York rummaged through the supplies stored in the shack and found a wool blanket, which he wrapped around Violet on top of his coat. Then he found a tin of coffee and a pot, and set about making something hot to drink. His movements were economical, no wasted motion, and Violet found herself watching him with a kind of detached fascination. He was probably in his late 20s, she guessed, with the lean, rangy build of a man who made his living outdoors. There was a scar on his left hand, white against his tanned skin, and another along his jaw that disappeared into his hairline. Here, he said, pressing a tin cup of hot coffee into her hands. Drink this. Slowly. The coffee was strong and bitter and scalded her tongue, but it was the most wonderful thing Violet had ever tasted. She sipped it carefully while York crouched by the stove feeding it more wood. The firelight painted shadows across his face, making him look both younger and older at the same time. Thank you, Violet said when she could finally speak without her teeth chattering. You saved my life, both our lives. York glanced at her, his blue eyes unreadable. Anyone would have done the same. No, Violet said firmly. They would not have. Marcus did not. Something dark passed across York's face. This Marcus sounds like he needs a good beating. Probably, Violet agreed, but I doubt I will ever see him again. He was heading to California, last I heard. Good riddance then. York poured himself some coffee and sat down on the floor near the stove, his back against the wall. You have people in Sioux Falls, somewhere to go, Violet shook her head. No, I have been traveling with Marcus for 6 months. We left Pennsylvania after my mother died. She was all I had. She looked down at her coffee, blinking against the sting of tears. I suppose I will find work somehow, though I do not know who will hire a pregnant woman with no husband. You could say you are a widow, York suggested practically. No one needs to know different. It was a simple solution, and Violet felt foolish for not thinking of it herself. I suppose that could work, though I still need to find employment. York was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those clear blue eyes. The double R is always looking for help. Mrs. Robertson, the owner, she is a good woman. Her husband died 5 years back and she runs the ranch herself with her son. They have a big house, always need help with cooking and cleaning. She might take you on. Hope flickered in Violet's chest, small and fragile as a candle flame. Do you really think so? I can ask, York said. No promises, but it is worth a try. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside and the crackle of the fire in the stove. Violet felt exhaustion pulling at her, but she was afraid to sleep, afraid this was all a dream and she would wake up frozen in the snow. The baby kicked again, a strong flutter against her ribs, and she rested her hand on her belly. "Is this your first?" York asked, nodding toward her stomach. "Yes," Violet said. "I am terrified." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, raw and honest. "I do not know the first thing about babies. My mother died before I could tell her, before she could teach me anything." York's expression softened. "My sister had 4 kids. She used to say that babies are tougher than they look, and that most of raising them is just loving them and keeping them fed." "You have a sister?" "Had," York said quietly. "She died 2 years ago. Fever took her and her husband both. The kids went to live with her husband's brother in St. Louis." "I am sorry," Violet said, meaning it. There was grief in the lines around his eyes, the kind that never fully healed. "Life is hard out here," York said with a shrug that tried to be casual but was not. "You do what you can and hope it is enough." The blizzard raged outside for hours. York made them a simple meal from the supplies in the shack. Beans and hardtack that he softened in the bean water, and it tasted like a feast to Violet. As the day wore on, and the small space grew warm from the fire, Violet felt her eyelids growing heavy. She tried to fight it, but York must have noticed her struggling. "Get some sleep," he said gently. "I will keep the fire going and wake you if anything changes." "What about you?" Violet asked. "You must be tired too." "I have spent plenty of nights in this shack. I am fine." He settled himself more comfortably against the wall, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "Rest now. You need it more than I do." Violet wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. She lay down on the narrow bunk, still wrapped in the blanket and York's coat, and within minutes she was asleep. She woke once in the night, disoriented and frightened until she remembered where she was. The fire was still burning bright, and York was in the same position by the wall, though his eyes were closed now. Even in sleep he looked alert, ready to wake at the slightest sound. Violet watched him for a moment, this stranger who had saved her life without hesitation, who had promised she would never be cold again. She did not know what made her trust him, but she did, bone deep and absolute. When she woke again, pale winter light was filtering through the single small window, and the wind had stopped howling. York was already up, stoking the fire and preparing more coffee. He glanced over when he heard her stir. "Morning," he said. "Storm passed a few hours ago. We can head to the ranch once you have had something to eat." Violet sat up slowly, her body stiff and sore. "How far is it?" "About 3 miles. Not bad now that the weather has cleared." York poured her coffee and handed her some more hardtack. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Violet said honestly. The warmth and rest had done wonders, though she was still exhausted in a way that went beyond just one night without sleep. "Thank you again. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You did not have to help me." "Yes, I did," York said simply, as if there had never been any other choice. They ate quickly. Then York went to check on his horse while Violet made herself as presentable as possible. It was not much. Her dress was wrinkled and stained, her hair a tangled mess, but it would have to do. When York came back, he helped her into his coat again and they stepped outside. The world had been transformed overnight. Everything was covered in a thick blanket of white, pristine and beautiful and deadly. The road was barely visible, just a slight depression in the snow, but York seemed to know exactly where he was going. He lifted Violet onto his horse, then swung up behind her just like the day before. They set off at a steady walk, the horse plowing through the snow with patient determination. "Tell me about the double R," Violet said as they rode. She needed to know what she was walking into, needed to prepare herself. "It is a good-sized spread, about 2,000 acres," York said. "Mrs. Robertson runs cattle, couple hundred head. Her son, Daniel, he is 25 and handles most of the day-to-day operations. There are 4 of us hands who work year-round, and they hire on extra help during branding and roundup. The house is big, built by Mr. Robertson back when he first claimed the land. Mrs. Robertson is strict but fair. She does not tolerate drinking or gambling or mistreating the animals." "And you think she might hire me?" Violet asked, trying to keep the desperate hope out of her voice. "Like I said, I will ask. She has been talking about needing help in the house. Her daughter used to help, but she got married last year and moved to Rapid City." York paused. "She is not going to judge you for being pregnant if that is what you are worried about. She is not that kind of woman." Relief flooded through Violet. She had been worried about exactly that, about being turned away because of her situation. "What about the others? The other ranch hands?" "They are good men," York said. "Couple of them are married and live in cabins on the property with their wives. The other one, Thomas, he is young and keeps to himself mostly. They will not give you any trouble." The ranch appeared gradually, first the outlying buildings and corrals, then the main house rising from the snowy landscape. It was indeed big. 2 stories of solid wood construction with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys, and several horses stood in a corral near the barn, their breath steaming in the cold air. York rode straight to the main house and dismounted, then helped Violet down. Her legs felt shaky after the ride, and she was grateful when York kept a steadying hand on her elbow as they climbed the porch steps. He knocked firmly on the door, and after a moment, it swung open to reveal a woman in her mid-50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a bun and sharp green eyes that took in every detail of Violet's appearance in a single glance. "York," the woman said. "I was wondering if you got caught in that storm." "Who is this?" "Mrs. Robertson. This is Miss Violet Winters. I found her on the road yesterday, left stranded in the blizzard. She is a widow, recently moved to the area, and she is looking for work." York delivered the lie smoothly, and Violet was grateful for it. "I remembered you mentioning needing help in the house, so I brought her here." Mrs. Robertson's eyes went to Violet's belly, then back to her face. "You are with child?" "Yes, madam," Violet said, lifting her chin. "But I am healthy and strong, and I am a hard worker. I can cook and clean and do whatever else you need. I will not be any trouble, I promise." Mrs. Robertson studied her for a long moment, then stepped back from the door. "Come inside before you freeze. We can talk about this properly over breakfast." The interior of the house was warm and spacious, with good solid furniture and rugs on the wood floors. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air, making Violet's stomach growl. Mrs. Robertson led them into a large kitchen where a young man with red hair and freckles was tending to a cast iron skillet on the stove. "Daniel, set 2 more places," Mrs. Robertson said. "We have guests." Daniel turned and his eyes widened when he saw Violet, but he said nothing, just nodded and grabbed more plates from the cupboard. They all sat down at the big wooden table, and Mrs. Robertson poured coffee while Daniel dished up bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes. It was more food than Violet had seen in days, and she had to force herself not to eat too quickly. "So," Mrs. Robertson said once they were all settled, "tell me about yourself, Miss Winters." Violet told the story they had invented about being from Pennsylvania, about her husband dying in an accident before they could come west together, about having no family left and needing to make her own way. The lies tasted bitter in her mouth, but they were necessary. Mrs. Robertson listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. "And the baby is due when?" she asked. "2 months, maybe a bit more," Violet said. "And after the baby comes, what then?" "I will keep working," Violet said firmly. "I can keep the baby with me while I work or make arrangements. I will not let it interfere with my duties." Mrs. Robertson glanced at York, who had been sitting quietly eating his breakfast. "And you vouch for her?" "I do," York said without hesitation. "She has had a rough time, but she has got backbone. She will work hard for you, Mrs. Robertson was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. I will give you a trial period. 2 weeks. You will help with the cooking and cleaning, laundry, mending, whatever else needs doing. Room and board provided plus $5 a month. If it works out, we will discuss permanent employment." "Agreed." "Yes," Violet said quickly, relief making her voice shake. "Yes, thank you. You will not regret this, I promise." "See that I do not," Mrs. Robertson said, but her voice was not unkind. "Daniel, show Miss Winters to the spare room upstairs. She can get settled in. York, you had best get yourself some rest. You look half frozen." York caught Violet's eye across the table and gave her a small nod that felt like encouragement. Then Daniel was leading her upstairs, chatting pleasantly about the house and the ranch, and Violet followed in a daze. The room he showed her to was small but clean, with a real bed covered in quilts, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the snow-covered ranch. It was more than she had dared hope for. "Bathroom is at the end of the hall," Daniel said. "Supper is at 6. If you need anything, just holler." He paused in the doorway. "Ma is tough, but she's got a good heart. You will be fine here." After he left, Violet sat down on the bed and let herself cry for the first time since Marcus abandoned her. Not tears of sadness, but of relief so overwhelming it felt like it might drown her. She was safe. She and her baby were safe. And it was all because of York Lancaster, a cowboy who had found her in the snow and promised she would never be cold again. Over the next 2 weeks, Violet threw herself into work with a determination born of gratitude and desperation. She rose before dawn to help Mrs. Robertson prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent her days cooking and cleaning and doing laundry, and fell into bed each night exhausted but satisfied. Mrs. Robertson was exacting in her standards but never cruel, and she seemed pleased with Violet's efforts. The other ranch hands were polite and respectful, tipping their hats when they saw her and thanking her for the meals she helped prepare. Thomas, the young one York had mentioned, barely spoke to anyone, but he always made sure to carry an extra firewood for the kitchen stove. The married hands, Jim and Carl, occasionally brought their wives by to visit, and both women were kind to Violet, offering advice about the baby and promising to help when her time came. But it was York that Violet found her thoughts returning to again and again. He came to the main house for meals with the other hands, always sitting at the long table in the dining room where the ranch employees ate. He was quiet, speaking only when spoken to, but his presence filled the room in a way Violet could not explain. She found herself watching him when she thought no one was looking, noticing the way he moved with unconscious grace, the way he listened carefully when someone spoke, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. A week after Violet arrived, she was hanging laundry in the yard when York approached, leading his horse toward the barn. He stopped when he saw her struggling with a heavy wet sheet. "Here," he said, taking the sheet from her hands and hanging it on the line with ease. "You should not be lifting heavy things in your condition." "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Violet said, but she was smiling. "Though I appreciate the help." York looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You are settling in all right." "Yes," Violet said. "Thanks to you. Mrs. Robertson offered me a permanent position yesterday. I cannot thank you enough for bringing me here." "You do not need to thank me," York said. He hesitated, then added, "I am glad you are safe." They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, and Violet felt something shift between them, some awareness that had been building since that day in the snow. Before she could name it, York cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should get back to work," he said. "But if you need anything, anything at all, you let me know." "I will," Violet promised, watching as he led his horse away. That evening, after the supper dishes were washed and put away, Violet sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl, watching the sun set over the snow-covered prairie. The door opened behind her and York stepped out, his own coat buttoned against the cold. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Please," Violet said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Finally, York spoke. "I have been thinking about that day I found you, about how close it was. If I had been riding a different route, if the storm had been worse, if I had been even a few minutes later." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It keeps me up at night sometimes." "But you were not later," Violet said softly. "You were exactly where you needed to be. You saved us." She rested her hand on her belly, where the baby was moving gently. "I do not believe in fate or divine providence or any of that, but sometimes I wonder. What are the odds that you would come along that road at that exact moment?" "I do not know," York admitted, "but I am grateful I did." He looked at her, his blue eyes serious in the twilight. "I know we have not known each other long, but I feel like I need to tell you something. That day in the snow, when I promised you would never be cold again, I meant it. Not just in that moment, but always. I do not know how to explain it, but something in me knew that finding you meant something, that you meant something." Violet's heart was pounding so hard she thought York must be able to hear it. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I care about you," York said, the words coming out rough and honest. "I know it is probably too soon, and I know you have been through hell, and I do not want to make things complicated for you. But I could not keep it to myself anymore. You should know that you have got someone in your corner, someone who wants to see you happy and safe." Tears pricked at Violet's eyes, but they were good tears this time. "York, She did not know how to say that she felt the same way, that she thought about him constantly, that his presence made her feel things she had never felt with Marcus. "I care about you too, so much it scares me. After Marcus, I swore I would never trust anyone again, never let anyone close. But you are different. You have been nothing but kind and good since the moment we met." York reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I am not Marcus. I would never hurt you or leave you or make you feel like you were not worth everything." "I know," Violet whispered. "I know that." They sat holding hands until the stars came out, and Violet felt something broken inside her begin to mend. Over the following weeks, as winter slowly gave way to early spring, Violet and York grew closer. He found excuses to be near the house more often, volunteering for tasks that kept him close by. They took walks together when the weather permitted, talking about everything and nothing. York told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the wanderlust that had brought him north to the Dakota Territory. Violet told him the truth about Marcus, about how she had been so desperate for love and security that she had ignored all the warning signs until it was too late. "I was stupid," she said one afternoon as they walked along the creek that ran through the ranch property. The ice was starting to break up, revealing dark water underneath. "I thought if I just loved him enough, he would love me back, but you cannot make someone care about you." "You were not stupid," York said firmly. "You were hopeful. That is not a flaw, Violet. The world needs more hope, not less. Even when it leads to heartbreak, especially then." York stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Listen to me. What Marcus did, that is on him, not you. You deserved better then, and you deserve better now. You deserve someone who sees how strong you are, how brave. Someone who would rather die than leave you out in the cold. Someone like you, Violet asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, York said. Someone exactly like me. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, his lips warm against hers. It was nothing like kissing Marcus had been. There was no urgency, no demand. Just tenderness and promise and a feeling like coming home. When they pulled apart, Violet was crying again, and York wiped away her tears with his thumb. I love you, he said. I know it is fast and may be foolish, but I do. I love you, and I love that baby you are carrying, and I want to be there for both of you if you will let me. Yes, Violet said, laughing through her tears. Yes, of course, yes. I love you too. I think I have loved you since you wrapped your coat around me and promised I would never be cold again. They stood there by the creek, holding each other, while the ice broke apart and flowed downstream, and the world began to wake up from its winter sleep. 2 weeks later, Violet went into labor. It started in the middle of the night, a low cramping in her back that gradually moved to her belly and intensified until she could not ignore it anymore. She made her way downstairs, gripping the banister for support, and knocked on Mrs. Robertson's door. Within minutes, the house was in organized chaos. Mrs. Robertson sent Daniel to fetch the doctor from Sioux Falls and to bring back Carl's wife Martha, who had helped with several births. She settled Violet in her room with plenty of towels and hot water, talking to her in a calm, steady voice that kept the panic at bay. York appeared in the doorway, his face white with worry. I heard. Is she all right? Is there anything I can do? She is fine, Mrs. Robertson said firmly. This is normal. Now get out of here. This is no place for men. York, Violet called out, and he was at her side in an instant, taking her hand. I am scared. I know, he said, brushing her hair back from her sweaty forehead, but you are the strongest person I know. You are going to get through this, and I will be right downstairs the whole time. I am not going anywhere. Promise. I promise, York said. You will never be alone again. Mrs. Robertson shooed him out after that, and the long hours of labor began in earnest. The doctor arrived around dawn, and Martha came with him, bustling and efficient. They coached Violet through the contractions, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths. The pain was worse than anything Violet had ever imagined, wave after wave of it until she thought she might break apart. But every time she wanted to give up, she thought about York waiting downstairs, about his promise, and she found the strength to keep going. Finally, as the sun was climbing high in the morning sky, the baby came. A boy, red-faced and screaming, absolutely perfect. The doctor cut the cord and Martha cleaned him up, then placed him in Violet's arms. He was so small, so fragile, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right into her soul. Violet started crying, overwhelmed by love so fierce it felt like it might consume her. He is beautiful, Mrs. Robertson said, smiling down at them both. What will you name him? Violet had been thinking about this for weeks, but suddenly she knew with absolute certainty. Victor. His name is Victor Winters. For victory, she thought, because we survived, because we won. That is a strong name, Martha said approvingly. Now let us get you both cleaned up, and then you can show him off to that young man wearing a hole in the floor downstairs. An hour later, Violet was propped up in bed with Victor sleeping in her arms when York appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his hair standing on end like he had been running his hands through it, but his face lit up when he saw them. Come here, Violet said softly. Come meet our son. York crossed the room slowly, almost reverently, and sat carefully on the edge of the bed. He looked down at Victor with an expression of such wonder that it made Violet's heart ache. He is perfect, York whispered. "Look at him, Violet. He is perfect. Do you want to hold him?" York looked terrified at the prospect, but he nodded. Violet showed him how to support the baby's head, then carefully transferred Victor into his arms. York held the baby like he was made of spun glass, staring down at him with naked love on his face. "Hello, Victor," he said quietly. "I am York. I am going to take care of you and your mama, I promise. Nothing bad is ever going to happen to either of you while I am around." Victor yawned, a tiny mouth stretching wide, and York laughed with pure joy. Watching them together, Violet felt like her heart might burst. This was her family. Not the one she had been born into, or the one she had tried to build with Marcus, but the one she and York were creating together out of love and choice and determination. "Marry me," York said suddenly, looking up from the baby to meet Violet's eyes. "I know I do not have much to offer, just a ranch hand's wages and a heart that is completely yours, but marry me. Let me be Victor's father for real. Let me be your husband." "Yes," Violet said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." York carefully handed Victor back to Violet, then leaned in and kissed her soft and sweet. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he said against her lips. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Violet said. "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for keeping your promise." They were married 3 weeks later in the parlor of the ranch house, with Mrs. Robertson and Daniel and all the ranch hands as witnesses. Violet wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Robertson had helped her alter to fit her post-pregnancy body, and York wore his best shirt and a string tie he borrowed from Jim. The ceremony was performed by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Sioux Falls, and it lasted all of 10 minutes, but to Violet it was more meaningful than any grand church wedding could have been. "I, York Lancaster, take you, Violet Winters, to be my lawfully wedded wife," York said, his voice steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers. "I promise to love you and honor you and protect you for all the days of my life. I promise that you will never be cold or alone or afraid again. I promise to be a good father to Victor and to any other children we might have. I promise to build a life with you that is full of love and laughter and hope." Violet was crying by the time he finished, happy tears that she did not bother to wipe away. "I, Violet Winters, take you, York Lancaster, to be my lawfully wedded husband," she said. "I promise to love you with everything I have. I promise to stand by your side through whatever life brings us. I promise to build a home with you, a real home where we both belong. I promise to never forget that you saved my life, and to spend the rest of my days showing you how grateful I am that you did." They exchanged simple gold bands that York had bought in town with money he had been saving, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, York kissed her like it was the first and last time all at once. The room erupted in cheers and applause, and Mrs. Robertson had tears in her eyes as she hugged them both. "You are good for each other," she said. "I knew it the day York brought you here." There was cake and cider to celebrate, and Victor slept peacefully through all of it, swaddled in a blanket Martha had knitted for him. Later, after the festivities died down, York took Violet to the small cabin that had belonged to one of the married hands who had moved on. Mrs. Robertson had offered it to them as a wedding present, along with a raise in York's wages, now that he had a family to support. The cabin was humble, just 2 rooms with a fireplace and a sleeping loft, but it was theirs. York had spent the past week fixing it up, patching holes and replacing broken boards and making sure the stove worked properly. There was a new bed in the loft, a table and chairs in the main room, and a cradle by the fireplace for Victor. Violet looked around with fresh tears in her eyes. "It is perfect," she said. "York, it is absolutely perfect." "It is not much," York said, looking uncertain, "but it is a start." We can make it a real home together." "It is already a home," Violet said, going to him and wrapping her arms around his waist. "Because you are here, because we are together, that is all I need." That night, after Victor was fed and sleeping soundly in his cradle, York and Violet lay together in their new bed in the loft. The fireplace below cast dancing shadows on the ceiling, and through the window they could see stars scattered across the dark sky. York held Violet close, his hand resting gently on her hip, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, Violet felt completely at peace. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered. "After everything that happened, I thought happiness was just something other people got to have. But here I am, with you and Victor, and I feel like the luckiest woman alive." "You deserve this," York said. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I am going to do my best to make sure you get it." They made love slowly and gently, relearning each other's bodies, and afterward Violet fell asleep with her head on York's chest, lulled by the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She dreamed of snow and cold and being lost, but in the dream York always found her, always wrapped her in warmth, always brought her home. The next few months passed in a blur of exhaustion and joy as they adjusted to life as a family. Victor was a good baby, generally happy and healthy, though he had his fussy moments like any infant. Violet continued to work in the main house during the day, bringing Victor with her, and Mrs. Robertson doted on him shamelessly. York worked long hours on the ranch, but he always came home at night, always took time to hold his son and kiss his wife and remind Violet that they were his world. As spring turned to summer, the ranch came alive with activity. Calves were born and branded, fences were mended, and the hands prepared for the annual cattle drive to market. York was chosen to go along, which meant he would be gone for nearly 2 weeks. The night before he left, he held Violet close and made her promise to take care of herself. "I hate leaving you," he said. "I know you are strong and capable, but I still hate it." "We will be fine," Violet assured him. "Mrs. Robertson and Martha will look after us, and you will be back before you know it." 2 weeks, York said. 14 days, it is going to feel like forever." "Then you had better come back quickly," Violet said, smiling up at him. "Because Victor and I are going to miss you terribly." York left before dawn the next morning, riding out with the other hands and a herd of cattle that kicked up dust clouds visible for miles. Violet stood on the porch of their cabin with Victor in her arms and watched until they disappeared from sight. The silence after they left felt heavy and strange, but Violet kept herself busy. She worked in the main house, took care of Victor, and spent her evenings working on a shirt she was sewing for York. The 2 weeks crawled by, each day feeling longer than the last. She found herself looking toward the horizon constantly, hoping to see riders approaching. On the 13th day, a messenger arrived at the ranch with news that made Violet's blood run cold. There had been a stampede during the cattle drive. Several men had been injured trying to control the herd. York was among them. Mrs. Robertson broke the news to Violet as gently as possible, but there was no gentle way to hear that the man you loved had been hurt. Violet felt like she could not breathe, like the world was tilting under her feet. "How bad?" she managed to ask. "They did not say," Mrs. Robertson admitted. "But he is alive, Violet. Hold on to that. He is alive and they are bringing him home." The hours until the men returned were the longest of Violet's life. She paced the porch with Victor in her arms, unable to sit still, unable to think about anything except York hurt and in pain. When she finally saw the dust cloud that signaled the riders' return, she ran toward them, her heart in her throat. York was slumped in the saddle, held there by Jim riding beside him. His face was gray with pain and exhaustion, and there was blood on his shirt. Violet cried out and ran faster, reaching them just as they were helping York down from his horse. He nearly collapsed, but Violet was there, getting under his arm to help support his weight. "I am all right," York said, though he clearly was not. "Violet, I am all right." "You are not all right, you are bleeding," Violet said, her voice shaking. "What happened?" "Caught a horn in my side trying to turn the herd," York said through gritted teeth. "It is not as bad as it looks." "It looks terrible," Violet said. She looked at Jim. "Help me get him inside." They got York into the cabin and onto the bed, and Violet sent Daniel for the doctor while she carefully cut away York's shirt to examine the wound. It was a deep gash along his ribs, still bleeding sluggishly. Violet felt sick looking at it, but she forced herself to stay calm. She cleaned the wound as best she could with hot water and whiskey, and York bore it stoically even though she knew it must hurt like hell. The doctor arrived and stitched York up, then left laudanum for the pain and instructions to keep the wound clean. After he left, Violet sat by the bed holding York's hand while Victor slept in his cradle nearby. "You scared me," she said quietly. "When they said you were hurt, I thought, I cannot lose you, York. I cannot do this without you." "You are not going to lose me," York said, squeezing her hand weakly. "It takes more than an angry steer to kill me. I promised you that you would never be cold again, remember? I intend to keep that promise for the next 50 years at least. 50 years. Violet said, trying to smile through her tears. "Is that all? 60 then. 70. However long you will have me." "Forever," Violet said. "I will have you forever." York healed slowly over the next few weeks. The wound got infected despite Violet's best efforts to keep it clean. And for 3 terrifying days, he burned with fever while Violet and Mrs. Robertson took turns sitting by his bedside, bathing him with cool cloths and forcing water down his throat. Violet barely slept, too afraid that if she closed her eyes she would wake to find him gone. But York was strong and stubborn, and he fought his way back from the brink. The fever broke on the 4th day, and while he was weak as a kitten for a while after, he was unmistakably on the mend. Violet cried with relief when he was finally able to sit up and eat solid food again. "You are not allowed to scare me like that ever again," she told him sternly. "My heart cannot take it." "I will do my best," York said with a weak smile, "though I cannot promise I will never get hurt again. Ranch work is dangerous." "Then maybe you should find a new line of work," Violet said, only half joking. York caught her hand and pulled her down to sit beside him on the bed. "Listen to me. I know this was scary. Hell, it scared me too, but we are going to be all right. We have made it through worse than this, you and me. We are survivors." "I know," Violet said, resting her head on his shoulder carefully so as not to jar his injury. "But I am allowed to worry about you. And I am allowed to worry about you," York countered. "That is what love is. Worrying about each other and taking care of each other and sticking together no matter what." He was right, of course. They had already weathered so much in their short time together. A near death in a blizzard, childbirth, now this. And they had come through it all stronger, their love deeper and more resilient than ever by late summer. York was fully healed and back to work, though Violet still fussed over him more than he probably needed. Victor was growing fast, his infant features sharpening into a little person's face. He had Violet's dark hair and eyes, but there was something of York in his smile, in the determined set of his chin. York doted on him completely, spending every spare moment teaching him things that were far too advanced for a baby, showing him how to pat the horses gently, letting him grab onto his fingers with his tiny fists. "You are going to be a great man someday," York told Victor one evening as he held him on the porch of their cabin. "You are going to be smart and strong and kind, and you are going to know that you are loved. That is the most important thing, little man. You are loved so much." Violet watched them from the doorway, her heart so full it ached. This was what she had always wanted without knowing it. Not wealth or status or even security, though those things were nice. Just this: a man who loved her and their child, a home they had built together, a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. That autumn, Mrs. Robertson offered York a partnership in the ranch. Her son Daniel had decided to move east to study law, and she needed someone she could trust to help run the operation. York was shocked by the offer, certain he had misheard, but Mrs. Robertson was adamant. "You have proven yourself a dozen times over," she said. "You work hard, you are honest, and you care about this place. That is worth more than all the ranching experience in the world. I am not getting any younger, and I need someone to help carry the load. I think you are that someone." York discussed it with Violet for hours that night, hardly daring to believe it was real. A partnership meant a share of the profits, meant real financial security for their family. It meant putting down roots, really making a life here. "What do you think?" York asked. "It is a big commitment." "It would mean we are here for the long haul." "I think," Violet said slowly, "that I cannot imagine anywhere I would rather be. This place has become home to me. These people are our family. And you would be amazing at this, York. You already pour your heart into this ranch. Now you would have a real stake in it." "Then we are doing this," York said, grinning. "We are really doing this." They celebrated with Mrs. Robertson and the other hands that evening, and there was a sense of rightness to it all, of pieces falling into place exactly as they were meant to. York signed the partnership papers the next day, and Violet felt tears prick her eyes as she watched him write his name. They had come so far from that day in the snow. The first year of the partnership was hard work but rewarding. York threw himself into learning the business side of ranching, staying up late going over the books with Mrs. Robertson, making plans for expanding the herd and improving the grazing land. Violet continued working in the main house, but now it felt different somehow, knowing that they had a real future here, that this was not just a job but a legacy they were helping to build. Victor had his first birthday in January, exactly a year after York found Violet in the snow. They had a small celebration with cake and gifts, and Victor's face when he tasted sugar for the first time was so comical that everyone burst out laughing. He was walking now, toddling around on chubby legs, getting into everything with the fearless determination of a child who knew he was loved and safe. That night, after Victor was asleep and they were lying in bed, York turned to Violet with a serious expression. "You ever think about it?" he asked. "About how different things could have been. If I had not found you that day, if Marcus had never left you, if any of 100 other things had or had not happened." "Sometimes," Violet admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. The past is the past. What matters is what we have now." "I think about it all the time," York said. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I ever knew you existed. It terrifies me, Violet. The thought that we might never have met, that you might have died out there in the snow." "But I did not," Violet said gently, turning to face him. "You found me. You saved me. And we are here together with our beautiful son and a good life ahead of us. That is what matters." York pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I did not know I was capable of feeling this much for another person. You and Victor, you are my whole world. And you are ours," Violet said. "We are a family, York. We are always going to be a family." "I want more," York said suddenly. "More children, I mean, if you want them too. I want to fill our home with babies, with life and noise and love. Is that crazy?" Violet laughed softly. "No, it is not crazy. I want that too. A whole house full of children with your eyes and your smile. When? York asked, already starting to kiss her neck in a way that made her breath catch. Well, Violet said, smiling in the darkness. We could start working on it right now if you like. And they did. By the time spring arrived, Violet was pregnant again. This time there was no fear or uncertainty, only joy and excitement. Victor seemed to sense the change, becoming extra protective of his mother, patting her belly gently when York showed him where his new brother or sister was growing. The pregnancy was easier than the first had been, perhaps because Violet was not dealing with heartbreak and abandonment this time. She felt strong and healthy, working almost up until the day her water broke in the middle of dinner preparation. Mrs. Robertson took over calmly, sending someone for Martha and the doctor, and 7 hours later Violet gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, because she had the most perfect pink rosebud mouth. York cried when he held her for the first time, tears streaming down his face unabashedly. She looks just like you, he told Violet. She is so beautiful, they both are. We make good babies, Violet said, exhausted but happy. Victor was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her constantly with his gentle toddler hands. York taught him how to be careful, how to support her head, and soon Victor was declaring himself the best big brother in the whole world. The years that followed were full and rich, and sometimes difficult but always good. They had 2 more children, another boy they named David and then twin girls named Hope and Grace. Their cabin grew too small, so York built them a bigger house with his own hands, working on it in the evenings and on Sundays. It was nothing fancy, but it had 4 bedrooms and a big kitchen and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides, and to Violet it was perfect. Mrs. Robertson grew older and eventually turned over more and more of the ranch operations to York. She passed away peacefully in her sleep when Victor was 10, and in her will she left her share of the ranch to York and Violet, making them the sole owners. It was a responsibility that weighed heavily on York, but he was determined to honor Mrs. Robertson's faith in him by making the Double R the best ranch in the territory, and he did. Under his management, the ranch prospered. They expanded the herd, bought more land, hired on more hands. Violet kept the books and managed the household, raising their children to be kind and hardworking and grateful for everything they had. Victor grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and racing horses and generally giving Violet heart attacks. David was quiet and bookish, spending more time reading than outside, but he had a gift with animals that made up for his lack of interest in the hard labor of ranching. Hope and Grace were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and playing elaborate imaginary games that made sense to no one but them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, York surprised Violet with a trip into Sioux Falls for dinner at the fancy hotel restaurant. They got dressed up, leaving the children with Jim and his wife for the evening, and rode into town in the wagon. Violet wore a new dress that York had bought her, green silk that brought out the hints of emerald in her hazel eyes, and York wore a suit that made him look almost like a different person, though the cowboy was still visible in the way he moved, the way he held himself. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing, reminiscing about the early days and laughing about how naive they had been. "Do you remember when I told you that you would never be cold again?" York asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Of course I do," Violet said. "I remember everything about that day, how scared I was, how certain I was going to die, and then you appeared out of the snow like some kind of angel." "I am no angel," York said with a laugh. "But I meant that promise, Violet, then and now. You will never be cold as long as I am alive." "I know," Violet said softly. You have kept that promise every single day for 10 years. You have kept me warm and safe and loved. You gave me a life I never could have dreamed of. You gave me the same, York said. Before I met you, I was just drifting. Working, moving from place to place, never putting down roots. But you made me want to stay. You made me want to build something that would last. You gave me a purpose, Violet. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to work hard and be better. Everything good in my life comes from you. Not everything, Violet protested. You would have been successful no matter what. You are smart and hardworking and good with people. Mrs. Robertson saw that in you from the beginning. Maybe, York conceded, but it would not have meant anything without you to share it with. A ranch is just a business, just land and cattle and work. But our ranch, our home, that is something special because we built it together. Because every fence post and every calf and every dollar we earn is for our family, for our future. They finished their dinner and walked through the streets of Sioux Falls, now grown large enough to be considered a real city. The town had changed so much in the decades since Violet arrived, growing and modernizing, but some things remained the same. The Dakota sky was still impossibly big, the stars still bright in the darkness, and York still held her hand like it was precious, like she was precious. "Thank you," Violet said as they walked, "for everything, for saving my life, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life." "I am so grateful, York. Every single day I am grateful." "The feeling is mutual," York said, pulling her close and kissing her there on the street corner, not caring who saw. "I love you, Violet Lancaster. I am always going to love you." As they drove home that night, Violet looked up at the stars and thought about fate and chance and divine providence. She thought about Marcus and wondered where he was now, if he ever thought about the woman he left in the snow. She hoped he had found whatever he was looking for out in California, but mostly she just felt sorry for him. He had missed out on knowing Victor, on being part of their family, on all the love and joy that came from choosing to stay instead of run. But his loss was York's gain and hers. Because if Marcus had not left her, York never would have found her. And as painful as that day in the snow had been, as terrifying and desperate, it had led her to this, to everything she had ever wanted. The years continued to pass in that relentless way they do, marked by birthdays and holidays and the changing seasons. The children grew and changed, their personalities sharpening. Victor fell in love with a girl from town, a sweet-natured blonde named Sarah, and married her when he was 22. They built a house on the ranch property and had babies of their own, making Violet and York grandparents for the first time. Rose shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to go to college back east, to study to become a teacher. David decided ranching was not for him after all and moved to Rapid City to open a bookstore. Hope and Grace stayed close to home, both marrying local boys and settling on the ranch. Through it all, York and Violet remained the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They still worked hard, though York did less of the physical labor now and more of the managing. They still made time for each other, still took walks and talked for hours and made love like newlyweds. Gray crept into their hair, lines appeared around their eyes and mouths, but York still looked at Violet like she hung the moon, and Violet still felt her heart skip when York smiled at her. On a cold January day in 1909, 25 years after York had found Violet in the snow, they stood on the porch of their house watching their grandchildren play in the yard. There were 8 of them now, ranging from infant to teenager, all loud and energetic and full of life. Inside, the house was full of their children and their spouses, preparing dinner together, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting out through the windows. "Can you believe it has been 25 years?" Violet asked, leaning against York's side. Even now, his warmth was her favorite thing, better than any fire or blanket. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," York said. "Other times it feels like we have always been together, like there was never a time before you." "I prefer to think of it that way," Violet said. "I do not like to remember the before. The after is so much better." York wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Do you ever regret it? Any of it? The hard times, the struggles, the times when we did not know if we were going to make it?" "Never," Violet said fiercely. "Not for 1 second. Every hard time just made us stronger. Every struggle brought us closer together. And look at what we have now, York. Look at all of this." She gestured to the yard full of grandchildren, the house full of family, the ranch spread out around them. "This is our legacy. Not just the land or the business, but this family. These people who love each other and support each other and stick together. We built this. You and me." "We did," York agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I need to tell you something I have been thinking about a lot lately." Violet felt a flicker of concern. "What is it?" "That day I found you in the snow," York said slowly. "I told you that you would never be cold again, and I meant it. But it was more than that, Violet. In that moment I saw my whole future. I saw you and me in all of this somehow. I knew that saving you was not just the right thing to do, it was the most important thing I would ever do. It was like everything in my life had been leading to that moment, to that exact spot on that exact day. And finding you there, that changed everything. It gave my life meaning and purpose and direction." Tears were streaming down Violet's face. "You changed my life too. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me love and safety and a family. You gave me hope when I had none left. You kept your promise, York. I have never been cold again, not once in 25 years. Not in body and not in spirit. You have kept me warm with your love every single day." York cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "And I always will. For as long as I draw breath, you will be warm and safe and loved. That is my vow to you, Violet, today and always." He kissed her then, and it was like the first time all over again, full of promise and hope and endless love. Around them, their grandchildren played and shouted. Their children laughed inside the house, and the ranch stretched out across the snowy landscape, a testament to what could be built when two people chose each other every single day. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet except for the crackle of the fire in the fireplace, Violet and York sat together on the sofa, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. They did not talk, did not need to. After 25 years together, they could communicate entire conversations with just a glance or a touch. But finally, as the fire burned low and sleep began to tug at them, Violet spoke. "You think Marcus ever wonders what happened to me, to us?" It was a question she had never asked before, and York considered it carefully before answering. "I do not know. Maybe. But it does not matter, does it? He made his choice all those years ago, and we made ours. Our life is what it is because of the choices we made, the love we chose to build together." "You are right," Violet said. "It does not matter. I just hope wherever he is that he found some kind of happiness, that he learned from his mistakes. Nobody deserves to be miserable forever, not even him." "That is one of the things I love most about you," York said. "Your capacity for forgiveness, for seeing the good in people even when they have hurt you. You are a better person than I am, Violet Lancaster." "No," Violet said firmly. "I am just a person who knows how lucky she is. Who knows that life is too short to hold onto anger and bitterness. Marcus gave me Victor, even if he did not mean to, even if he never wanted to. And Victor brought me you. So in a strange way, I am grateful for all of it. Even the bad parts led me here." They went to bed shortly after, climbing the stairs to their bedroom with the comfortable ease of long practice. York banked the fire and checked the doors while Violet changed into her nightgown and brushed out her hair. They had done this same routine thousands of times over the years, and yet it never got old. The simple domesticity of it, the knowing that they would do it again tomorrow and the day after that for as many tomorrows as they were given. In bed, they held each other close, and Violet listened to the sound of York's breathing gradually deepen as he fell asleep. She stayed awake a little longer, thinking about everything they had been through, everything they had built. She thought about that terrified girl in the snow, certain she was going to die, and she wished she could go back and tell her that everything was going to be all right, better than all right, more beautiful and joyful and full than she could possibly imagine. But she could not go back, could only move forward. And what a glorious forward it had been. The next few years brought more changes. Victor and Sarah had 3 more children, making Violet and York proud grandparents to a small army of grandchildren. Rose came back from college with a teaching certificate and a fiancé, a fellow teacher she had met in Boston. They married and settled in Sioux Falls, where Rose taught at the new elementary school. David's bookstore became successful enough that he opened a second location, and he married a quiet, bookish woman who was perfect for him. Hope and Grace each had children, filling the ranch with even more noise and laughter. York began to struggle with his health, developing a cough that would not go away. The doctor diagnosed him with a lung condition, common among men who had spent their lives working outdoors in all kinds of weather. He prescribed rest and warm, dry air, neither of which York was very good at providing himself. But Violet made sure he took care of himself, cutting back on his work at the ranch and letting Victor take over more of the day-to-day operations. "I am not an invalid," York protested when Violet tried to make him stay inside on a particularly cold day. "No, but you are not a young man anymore either," Violet said firmly. "You are 62 years old, York Lancaster, and you have worked hard every day of your life. Let someone else do the heavy lifting for once. Let Victor and the hands handle things. Your job now is to stay healthy so you can meet your great-grandchildren someday." "Great-grandchildren," York said, shaking his head in wonder. "How did we get so old, Violet?" "One day at a time," Violet said, kissing his forehead. "The same way we have done everything else, together." York did slow down after that, spending more time managing from the house, teaching Victor the finer points of running a ranch, passing on everything he had learned from Mrs. Robertson and from his own years of experience. He also spent more time with the grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days, about how he and Violet met, about the early struggles of building the ranch. The grandchildren never tired of the story of how he found their grandmother in the snow, how he had promised she would never be cold again. And did she? The youngest grandchild, a little girl named Emma, asked one day. Did she ever get cold again? "Not once," York said, winking at Violet across the room. "I kept my promise." On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were so many people that they had to set up tables in the yard, and the amount of food prepared could have fed an army. Children ran everywhere, laughter filled the air, and love was so thick you could almost see it, a golden warmth that had nothing to do with the summer sun. Victor stood up to make a toast, tapping his glass to get everyone's attention. "I want to say something about my parents," he said, gesturing to York and Violet. "Most of you know the story of how they met, but what you might not know is how rare what they have is. They have been together for 30 years, and in all that time, I have never seen them go to bed angry at each other. I have never heard them speak badly about each other. I have only seen them support each other, love each other, choose each other every single day. They taught me what real love looks like, what real partnership means. And I hope that all of us can follow their example, can build relationships as strong and lasting as theirs. So here is to York and Violet Lancaster. To 30 years of marriage and a lifetime of love. May you have 30 more. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and Violet wiped away tears while York squeezed her hand under the table. After the dinner and the toasts and the cake, after the children were exhausted and being carried home by their parents, after the last of the guests had said their goodbyes, Violet and York sat on their porch and watched the sun set. 30 years, Violet said softly. It feels like forever and no time at all. I would do it all again, York said. Every moment, good and bad. I would choose you every time, Violet. In every lifetime, in every universe, I would always choose you. And I would choose you, Violet said. My cowboy in the snow, my hero, my love. They sat there until the stars came out, holding hands and watching the night settle over their ranch, their home, their legacy. And Violet felt warm, so warm, surrounded by the love they had built and the life they had created. She had not been cold in 30 years, and she knew she never would be as long as York was by her side. The years that followed were gentler, slower. York's health continued to decline, but gradually, not dramatically. He spent more time sitting than standing, more time watching than doing, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Violet never wavered. She cared for him with the same devotion he had shown her all those years ago, making sure he was comfortable, keeping him warm, reminding him every day that he was loved. On a cold January morning in 1915, exactly 31 years after York had found Violet in the snow, he woke with a sense of peace he had not felt in months. His breathing was easier, the pain in his chest less acute. He turned to look at Violet sleeping beside him, her hair now completely silver but still beautiful, her face lined with decades of laughter and love. He watched her for a long moment, memorizing every detail, then gently shook her awake. "Violet," he said softly, "wake up, my love." She opened her eyes and smiled at him, that same smile that had been captivating him for over 3 decades. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Good," York said. "Better than I have in a while, actually. I want to talk to you about something." Concern flickered across Violet's face. "What is it?" "Nothing bad," York assured her. "I just want to make sure you know some things in case I do not get another chance to tell you." "York, do not talk like that. Please," York said. "Let me say this." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Finding you in that snow, bringing you home, watching you become the mother of my children and the heart of our family, that has been the greatest privilege of my life. You made me better, Violet. You made me want to be better. And I need you to know that if I could go back and live my life over, I would not change a single thing because every step brought me to you." "I love you," Violet said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much, York." "I love you too," York said. "And I promise you, even when I am gone, you will never be cold. Our love is going to keep you warm, and our children and grandchildren are going to take care of you. You are going to be surrounded by family and love for the rest of your days. That is my final promise to you, Violet Lancaster. You will never be alone, and you will never be cold." He died 2 days later, peacefully in his sleep, with Violet beside him holding his hand. The funeral was massive, attended by everyone whose lives he had touched over the years. Victor gave the eulogy, talking about his father's integrity, his work ethic, his endless capacity for love. Violet sat in the front row surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and while her heart was breaking, she also felt gratitude. Gratitude for the 31 years they had together, for the family they built, for the love that would outlast even death. In the months that followed, Violet grieved deeply but never alone. Her children took turns staying with her, making sure she ate and slept and knew she was loved. The grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with noise and life. And slowly, gradually, the sharp edges of grief began to soften into something more bearable. Violet continued to live on the ranch, helping where she could, watching Victor run things with the same care and dedication his father had shown. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about York, making sure they knew what kind of man he had been. She kept busy with her garden and her sewing and her books, finding joy in small things even as she missed York with every breath. On the anniversary of York's death, Violet walked out to his grave on the hill overlooking the ranch. The day was cold and clear, the sky that brilliant blue that York had always loved. She stood by the simple headstone, reading the inscription she had chosen. York Lancaster, 1852, 1915, beloved husband, father, grandfather, he kept his promises, I am still warm, she said out loud as if York could hear her. You kept your promise, even after you were gone. I am surrounded by love every day. Our family is thriving. The ranch is doing well. Everything you worked for, everything we built together, it is still here. And I am going to keep it going for as long as I can, because that is what you would want. That is what we promised each other. To build something that would last. A breeze picked up, cold but not unpleasant, and Violet imagined it was York's way of answering her. She smiled and touched the headstone one more time, then walked back down the hill to the house where her family waited. She had promised York she would go on living, really living, not just existing. And she intended to keep that promise. Violet lived another 12 years, remaining active and engaged until the very end. She saw all of her children settled and happy, met dozens of great-grandchildren, and even lived long enough to see a few great-great-grandchildren. She maintained her place at the center of the family, the matriarch everyone looked to for wisdom and guidance. On a warm spring evening in 1927, at the age of 72, Violet passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried next to York on the hill, and the entire town of Sioux Falls seemed to turn out for her funeral. Victor gave another eulogy, talking about his mother's strength, her resilience, her boundless capacity for love. My mother was left for dead in a blizzard, Victor said, his voice strong despite his grief. She could have died out there in the snow, alone and afraid. But a cowboy rode up and promised she would never be cold again, and he kept that promise for the rest of her life. They built a life together based on love and trust and choosing each other every single day. They taught all of us what family means, what love means. And that legacy, the one they built together, that will never die. It will go on in all of us and in all the generations that come after us. My parents may be gone, but their love lives on. It always will. Years later, when Victor was an old man himself, he would tell his own grandchildren the story of how his parents met, about the blizzard and the cowboy and the promise that was kept for a lifetime. The story became family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder of where they came from and what they were built on. The Double R Ranch remained in the family, passed from Victor to his children and then to his grandchildren. The original house that York and Violet built still stood, maintained carefully as a reminder of the family's origins. And on the hill overlooking it all, two graves stood side by side under the wide Dakota sky, marking the final resting place of a cowboy and the pregnant woman he found in the snow, the two people whose love had created a dynasty. The inscription on Violet's headstone was simple but perfect. Violet Lancaster, 1855–1927, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She was never cold again, and she never was. Even decades after her death, family members visiting the graves would feel a warmth there that had nothing to do with the sun, a sense of peace and love that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. It was as if the love York and Violet had shared was so powerful, so pure, that it had soaked into the very ground, becoming part of the land itself. The ranch prospered through the decades, surviving the Great Depression and 2 world wars, adapting and growing with the times. But at its heart, it remained true to the values York and Violet had instilled: hard work, integrity, family above all else. Every Lancaster child was raised hearing the story of their great-great-grandparents, taught that love and commitment and keeping your promises were the most important things in life. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled across the Dakota plains just like it had that day in January of 1884, family members would gather around the fire and tell the story again. About the pregnant woman left in the snow. About the cowboy who rode up and made a promise. About 2 people who chose each other and built a love that lasted not just a lifetime, but forever. Because in the end, that was the real legacy York and Violet left behind. Not the land or the cattle or the money, though those things mattered. Their real legacy was the proof that love, real love, could overcome anything. That 2 broken people could find each other in the worst circumstances and build something beautiful. That a promise made in desperation could be kept for a lifetime and beyond. That family, the family you choose and the family you build, was worth fighting for. And every member of the Lancaster family, from the oldest to the youngest, carried that legacy in their hearts. They knew where they came from. They knew what they were built on. They knew that somewhere up on that hill, 2 people who loved each other more than life itself rested side by side, together in death as they had been in life. And they knew that as long as there were Lancasters, as long as the story was told, York and Violet would never truly be gone. Their love would live on, warming the hearts of their descendants, just as York's promise had warmed Violet all those years ago. She was never cold again. And neither were any of the people who came after her, because the warmth of that love, that promise, that choice to build a life together against all odds, that warmth was eternal. It could not be extinguished by time or death or anything else the world could throw at it. It was the kind of love that people spent their whole lives searching for, and York and Violet had found it in the most unlikely of circumstances. In a blizzard, on a lonely road, in a moment of desperation and salvation. And from that moment, they had built something that would outlast them both, that would echo through generations, that would stand as proof that love, real love, was the most powerful force in the world. That was the story of York and Violet Lancaster. The cowboy and the woman he saved. The promise and the lifetime spent keeping it. The love that never died, not even when they did. And it was a story that would be told for as long as there were people to tell it, a reminder that even in the darkest, coldest moments, love could find a way. Love could save you. Love could warm you. Love could last forever. And that was the greatest promise of all.